Hello friends, welcome to my channel English Notes. Today's topic of my notes is plot of Tom Jones and symbols in Tom Jones. So let's start. Introduction. Henry Fielding was born in 1707 in Lieutenant George Fielding and his wife Sarah. History of Tom Jones, a foundling, was published in 1749. Henry died on October 8 of 1754 in Jonquil, Lisbon. Accordingly to William Hazlitt Fielding's novels throw massive light of 18th century society of England than the whole mass of historical documentary. The entries life of England, including countryside, highways, urban and rural society, is wonderfully presented. With the help of graphics and suggestive sketches, he provided a remarkably distinct and vivid impressions of the externalities of his age. The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling was published in 1749. Plot: Allworthy discovers a baby boy in his bed and finds local woman Jeremy Jones and her tutor, Mr. Partridge, guilty. Allworthy sends Jeremy away from the country and poverty. Stricken, stricken Partridge leaves of his own stricken Partridge leaves of his own accord. In spite of the criticism of the parish, Allworthy decides to bring up the boy. Bridget marries Captain Blayfield regards Tom Jones with jealousy while meditating on money matters. Captain Blayfield falls dead of an apoplexy. The narrative skips forward 12 years. Blayfield and Tom Jones have been brought up together. Allworthy is the only person who shows consistent affection for Tom. Tom is wild and Blayfield is pious. Tom frequently steals Tom frequently steals to support the family of Black George, one of Allworthy's servants. Tom spends much time with Squire Weston, Allworthy's neighbor, since the squire is impressed by Tom's sport, sportsmanship. Sophia Weston, Sophia Weston is Squire Weston's daughter. Sophia Weston, Squire Weston's daughter, falls deeply in love with Tom. Tom has already bestowed his affection on Molly Chagrim the poor. When Molly becomes pregnant, Tom prevents Allworthy from sending Molly to prison by admitting that he has fathered her child. Tom's commitment to Molly ends when he discovers that she has been having affairs. Allworthy falls gravely ill. He reads out his will, inherit most of his estate. He reads out his will, inherit most of his estate, although Tom is also provided for. A lawyer named Dowling arrives and announces the sudden and unexpected death of Bridget Allworthy. Blayfield calls Tom a bastard, and Tom retaliates by hitting Mrs. Weston, the aunt. Mrs. Weston, the aunt with whom Sophia spent much of her youth, comes to stay at the brothers' house. She and the squire fight consistently, but they unite over Mrs. Weston's plan to marry Sophia to Blayfield. Blayfield thus begins with courtship of Sophia. Sophia, however, strongly opposes the proposal. Blayfield tells Allworthy that Tom is a rascal who drunkenly about the house, and Allworthy banishes Tom from the country. Tom does not Tom does not want to Tom does not want to leave Sophia, but decides that he must follow the honorable path. Tom begins to wander about the countryside. In Bristol, he happens to meet up with Partridge, who becomes his loyal servant. Tom also rescues Mrs. Water from being robbed, and they being an affair a local inn. Sophia, who has runs away from Squire Weston's estate to avoid marrying Blayfield, stop at this inn that Tom's bed. The Irishman Fitzpatrick arrives at that inn searching for his wife, and Weston arrives searching for Sophia. Sophia stays with her lady relatives, Lady Bella Stone. Tom and Patrick stay in the house of Mrs. Miller and her daughters. A young gentleman called Mrs. Nightingale also inhabits the house, and Tom soon realizes that he and Nancy are in love. Nancy falls pregnant, and Tom conceives Nightingale too. marry her Lady Bellaston, and Tom begins an affair, although Tom privately continues to pursue Sophia. When he and Sophia are reconciled, Tom breaks off the relationship with Lady Bellaston by sending her marriage proposal that scares her away. She encourages Lord Philamar to rape Sophia. Squire Weston looks Sophia in her bedroom. Mr. Mr. Fitzpatrick. This begins a duel with Tom in defending himself. Tom stabs Fitzpatrick with the sword. Patrick visits Tom in jail. Mrs. Weston Allworthy and explains that Fitzpatrick is still alive and has admitted to initiating the duel. Allworthy realizes Blifil is very gentleman and he decides never to speak to him again. Mrs. Water also revealed that Tom's mother was Bridget Allworthy. Mrs. Myler explains to Sophia that the reason for Tom's marriage proposal to Lady Bellaston, and Sophia is satisfied now that Tom is Allworthy's heir. Squire Weston eagerly encourages the marriage between Tom and Sophia. Sophia chastises Tom for his lack of chastity but agrees to marry him. They live happily on Weston's estate, one around them with kindness and generosity. Now, symbols in Tom Jones. The fur muff. There are surprisingly few symbols in Tom Jones, especially given how long the novel is. We think that part of the reason for this relative lack of symbols is that Fielding keeps emphasizing the importance of realism and believability, realism and believability in fiction. Relies heavily literature that relies heavily on symbolism, on subject and image that actually means something else, tends to be less strictly realistic than what Fielding appears to be going for here. But still, there is clearly one thing in the novel that symbolizes Tom's and Sophia's love for one another. Sophia's fur muff. A muff is a tube of fur or fabric that women used to use to warm their hands back in the day. Mrs. Horner is the one who first points out the deeper meaning of Sophia's muff when she tells Sophia that she spotted Tom kissing it and calling it the prettiest muff in the world. Obviously, Tom is using the muff as a stand-in for Sophia herself. After hearing this romantic story, Sophia buys into the whole muff as symbol things wholeheartedly. When her muff accidentally falls into the fire, Sophia grabs it straight out of the flames. Her passion to save her muff convinced Tom that Sophia must have feelings for him. So this muff is what brings our two love-struck main characters together. The muff reappears twice more at the inn at the muff reappeared twice more at the inn at Upton, where Sophia discovers that Tom is sleeping with Mrs. Water. She bribes a maid to stick the muff into she bribes a maid to stick the muff in Tom's room somewhere where he will spot it. Tom finds the muff and realizes that he just missed Sophia and that she is probably angry with Tom finds the muff and realizes that he just missed Sophia and that she is probably angry with him. And when Tom refuses Arabella Horn's attractive proposal of marriage in book 15, chapter 12, he takes out Sophia's muff and kisses it to affirm his loyalty to her. Each time the each time the muff stands in for Sophia and for the relationship between the two. Now the big question, why a muff in particular? It is a pretty common object that Sophia would probably have carried around with her a lot, so it's a convenient, believable thing for Tom to notice about his lady love. It's also a physical object, so Tom can kiss it whenever he is thinking about Sophia. But beyond the explanation of convenience, there is a somewhat ruder interpretation. We'll just come out and say it. The slang term muff was in use even back in the 1740s. We are pretty sure that we we are pretty sure that Fielding specially chose a muff to symbolize Tom and Sophia's love because A. The fun is lewd and funny, and B, it emphasizes the sexual tension between the two characters early on in their relationship, which builds up and which builds up our suspense about when these two crazy kids are going to get together. Little Tommy. When Tom, Sophia, and Master Blifil are all kids together, Tom gives Sophia a little bird to raise. She calls the bird Tommy and attaches him to her wrist by a string. Master Blifil tricks Sophia into lending him little Tommy, at which point Mr. Blifil releases the bird into the air. Flies away. The bird flies away and sadly gets killed by a hawk. Sophia's love for Tommy the bird obviously implies something about her feelings for Tommy the boy, but even beyond the obviously lovey-dovey symbolism of this bird, we also think his fate has a deeper meaning. In a few short books, Tom is going to tie himself emotionally to Sophia in the same way that little Tommy the bird was attached to Sophia's wrist by a string. And then that link is going to be broken by the cruel manipulative intervention of Master Blifil, just as Master Blifil stole Tommy the bird from his owner Sophia. Like Tommy the bird, Tom is going to be set free to fly a difficult road, so it seems like Tommy the bird death by hawk is a bad omen for our hero. Luckily, Tom's fate is very different from little Tommy, but the twists and turns of Sophia's bird life strongly foreshadow the early relationship between Sophia and Tom before Tom is forced to leave Somerset to find his own fortune. The £100 note. Tom runs through money very quickly. Not only does he lose square all Worthy's £500 almost as soon as he leaves home, but he also spends the rest of his cash quickly on rounds of drinks for his soldier buddies or on charity for his local Hemingway. The point is, Tom is definitely careless with money. The one acceptation The one acceptation of Tom's spendthrift ways is the £100 note that Tom discovers in a small book that Sophia has dropped on the road to London. Tom hang on to Tom hangs on to this Tom Tom hangs on to this £100 note even when he is desperate for cash, and even when Patrick pressures him to just spend the money already. Tom refuses because he wants to use this money as a reason to see Sophia again. She is so deeply angry with him over his relationship with Mrs. Water that she might refuses to see him unless he has a definite excuse, like returning a large sum of money that he has lost. So friend, this is my notes on plot of the novel Tom Jones and symbols in Tom Jones. I hope you like it. If you like this video, please like, share, comment, subscribe and press the bell icon for new video notification. Thank you.